Hello. I just want to start off by thanking everyone for being here. I also want to start off by thanking Derek Anderson and the Bevy team and the entire Startup Grind team for bringing Startup Grind back in person. So just a round of applause for that entire team. It's great that everybody's here in person. It's been awesome to see so many friends and individuals that I haven't had a chance to connect with in person in a long time. I'm Ryan Neese, the managing partner and founder of Next Play Capital. We're actually based right here in Redwood City, so welcome to our city. Hopefully you're enjoying it. We're an investment platform that invests into a number of top-tier venture capital funds. We have a fund-to-fund product, and we also have the ability to co-invest alongside them with a direct investment program that we have as well. We are extremely grateful for the opportunity to find ways to look for men and women that pursue excellence. One of the things that I learned playing in the NFL and winning a Super Bowl is if you can get in a huddle with very talented individuals, you give yourself a chance to win. And that's what we try to look for. We try to find athletes, men and women that love to compete, that love to win, that are passionate about a mission and know that they're playing for something bigger than self. And so that's something that's extremely exciting to us. And I couldn't be more excited to sit next to this elite athlete and getting an opportunity to spend time with Edith Harbaugh, knowing that, one, you're one of our portfolio companies, but more importantly, knowing that you're an elite athlete. And most people wouldn't start off the conversation with Edith talking about you being an elite athlete. And we'll talk about your journey as a founder. But one of the things that I think is interesting about you is you're an ultra marathon runner. You do distance running for pleasure. Talk about what you learned through running and through distance running that's allowed you to be a better founder. And why do you abuse yourself like that?
Well, so up front, I don't do much distant running anymore. I'm more into biking these days, but I've run, I think, over 30 marathons, 30 50Ks, 10 50 miles, and 3 100 miles. And my joke is that I was on the cover of Ultra Running magazine, but only I knew it was me because it was my back in a big crowd, but I was on the cover.
You on the cover. Amazing. Well, speaking of the cover and speaking of opportunities, you were here in 2017 where you were raising your seed round. Fast forward to where we are today, LaunchDarkly now has over 2,000 plus customers. You have some of the best investors, some of the most top tier venture capitalists in your cap table. You've now valued at well over $3 billion. You've created an amazing rocket ship of a company. What's been the biggest lessons that you've learned from 2017 to now?
Oh, it's step by step. Startups aren't easy. There's the fun things where you get to be on stage with your investor and they brag about you. There's all the days in between where it's just kind of grinding it out, trying to make that hire that'll help move the product forward, trying to close a customer because you need another reference customer. It's just a lot of work.
Well, I know one of the things you talk about in terms of a lot of work is the change that you went through and the progression that you've gone through in your own career. I mean, you're on the product team, you're a product manager, product director. You also worked in marketing. You wore a number of different hats. How did that help you become a better leader when you started to manage people and manage more people?
Yeah, so I started off as an engineer, and like all engineers, I think I was pretty arrogant. It's funny you call me an elite athlete because I went to Harvey Mudd College, which was notorious for having one of the worst football programs in the nation.
That's okay. Not everybody can win,
Statistically, not only did they lose every game, they lost them by the biggest margins. So I was an engineer building products that were very cool, and I actually got a couple patents on them. But in some cases, they were products that nobody ever used. And that's very frustrating as an engineer because you spent your weekends, some late nights, building something, and then you bring it to market, nobody cares. So that's why I became a product manager, because I thought I want to build stuff that people actually use. I want to go talk to users, talk to customers, figure out what they want. And I did that for a while at a company called Vignette, and then I realized that you could still build something that was very useful, but if nobody knew about it, it didn't count. So that's when I got into marketing. So my original arrogant engineer self would say, well, I built this beautiful product, people should just know about it. But then when you actually go into the world, your customers and your users have 20 other things in their life.
Right.
besides whatever you're doing. And you need to market what you're doing and get it on their radar and make sure that they make it a priority.
In taking those lessons and everything that you learned, I would love to know, going back to when you and John started the business, and when you think about the origin of it, and you think about building a feature management platform from the ground up to serve the customers that you serve today, why did you think that you and John, out of the 7+ billion people on the planet, were uniquely positioned to go and build this company?
Well, let me pause for a second and say what we do. So I'm the CEO, co-founder of LaunchDarkly. We're a feature management platform where we allow our own customers to deliver, measure, and control features. So we have customers that are huge, like Intuit and IBM. We also have a lot of very small startups, I hope some of them are in this room, that use us to innovate quickly. And my co-founder, John, and I had been friends since college, and whenever we hung out, we just always talked about software. Like, he got a PhD in computer science, I'm a big nerd, and we were just talking about software, about agile, about waterfall, about pitfalls we'd seen. And when we started talking about the idea of LaunchDarkly, it was actually bizarre to us that it did not exist in the world. Like, I remember Googling for why isn't there a solution like this? How come it doesn't exist? And I had used a system like this built internally so many times at my prior jobs at TripIt. John had used it at Atlassian. And we were just convinced that this needed to exist. And the only surprise to us was that it didn't already exist, that we were somehow the first.
And as you guys launched and started to build and going to fulfill this mission, this dream to deliver this product, what were some of the roadblocks that you faced early on that maybe even at a point where you thought about quitting or turning around or pivoting, and what did you do to move through that? How did you fight through those fires?
So I talked about our own conviction that this needed to exist. Then reality slammed into us. We were in Silicon Valley at cutting edge companies, and to us it seemed very obvious that the wave of the future was cloud, fast releases, separated deployment from release. When we went out and talked to potential users, they thought we were way too far in the future. This was 2014 when most people were still on-prem.
Yep.
SaaS was considered risky, cloud was considered risky, and people said, I release twice a year. Why would I ever want to release quicker?
Right.
That was literally, so we started asking people, how often do you release? And they release software, and they'd say, once a quarter. And we said, do you want to release more often? No, we're good. So we had to do two separate things. We had to create this movement of innovation is good, risk-free innovation is good. And then we also had to convince people they could trust us when we were literally two people in a co-working space trying to get a product off the ground.
And what did you do in terms of trying to convince, obviously these potential customers that risk-free innovation is good? What was it that you were the message there?
Oh gosh. We would find people who already had done this at a big company.
Yeah.
So people who were at LinkedIn, Facebook, and were used to the style of development, and then were going to their own new companies and wanted the system they used to have. So one of our earliest customers, I still remember him, it was a guy named Lawrence, and he said, I want what I had at LinkedIn with rollbacks, canary releases, segmented users, and I said, we have that. And you can trust us.
And they trusted you?
Yes, they are still a customer.
And so I'm curious, obviously we have a number of individuals here in person and obviously watching that are just about to build companies or in the process of building companies and new on their journey as a founder. I'm curious, when you think back of your early days, what are 3 tips or things that you could share that you think could be valuable for these young founders to be better leaders?
Go talk to customers. I think there's this myth that you build something in secret for 2 years and then do a huge launch. From our very first days, we were going and talking to prospects. And when I say prospects, I mean just my friends, right? Who are all developers. And I'd say, hey, we have this. Can you install it? Can you use it? So talk to customers is actually 3 separate tips for me. talk to customers, listen to customers, and iterate. Um, you know, we would run into people saying, my homegrown system is better. And a tip that doesn't work is to fight them on that.
Right.
Instead, we would say, okay, if you think your homegrown system is better, can we see it? And that would really disarm people. So, you know, my friend Russ, he said, my homegrown system is better. I said, great, can you log in and show me what you think is better? And he showed me all this cool functionality around user segmentation. I was like, hey, John, we need to build this stuff.
Let's implement that. Let's get this into what we're doing. One of the other things I think is also unique is also pricing at the beginning, right? And trying to figure out pricing, and as you're trying to convince individuals to, you know, obviously be your customers, how did you wrestle through pricing?
Oh, I was terrible at the beginning. I was a very shy engineer, and I had been on sales calls before, but always as a product manager, where you just show up and talk about product. You don't have to make an ask.
Yeah.
I still remember the first time I asked one of our early customers, I said, can you pay us $20? And my voice like cracked in the middle. And they still make fun of me. They're like, do you remember that time?
They still give you a hard time about that?
Well, it's funny. So the developer I asked ended up joining our company later as one of our developers. So he's like, yes, you were terrible. But
at least they were honest.
yeah, I mean, I think one of my traits is I'm always willing to admit that I'm terrible and I'm going to get better. So for pricing, I just kept practicing. Like I would look in the mirror and I would say, I think this is worth 20K. Or do you think you would pay 20K for this? And you just get more confidence. Yep. And then, you know, now we're closing deals of, you know, six or seven figures.
There you go. Confidence. Yeah, give us some love for that. I think obviously so many people can relate with that, and that's why I wanted to ask, because you do. You start off at the beginning and you think it's worth this, and somebody's usually willing to pay much less than that. And so being able to continue to maintain confidence is really important. One of the other things that's important is building culture, and we see this with great teams and great companies. They often talk about great culture and having great camaraderie. Is that something that you believe in? And if so, talk about maybe the culture that you've created at LaunchDarkly.
Yeah, so I'm a product manager. And when you're building a company, you're not just building a product, you're also building the culture of your company. So in the very early days, it was me and my co-founder, and we known each other from college. And then when we started hiring people, we had this thing we called the lunch test, which was we like to eat lunch together every day. We didn't eat dinner because my co-founder had kids that he wanted to go home to. But we deliberately ate lunch and just talked about what's going on.
Yeah.
So when we had interviews, part of it was you ate lunch with us. And it was like, you know, if people have errands or whatever, you don't have to eat lunch together every day. But it was important that people shared what they were building, shared customer stories, shared their experiences, and had that camaraderie. It actually really cut down on our number of meetings too, because if you see somebody at lunch, you can just say like, "Hey, what
right?
Let's talk about this customer."
Well, that's obviously easier to do when you have 2 or 4, 10 people. But now at scale, at where you guys are, and the number of employees that you have, how do you continue to maintain what you guys originally started with?
We try to be intentional. So every single employee that joins, I spend an hour with them and talk about our values.
Every single employee?
Yes. So, it's a batch now. So like I'll have a batch of 10, and it's deliberately live. Like it's not me just
on a recording.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And I say to them to ask me as many questions as they want, as long as it's off the record. And it's really fun for me because I say your culture is only as strong as your most recent employee. Because there's all these values, beliefs, ways of thinking that they have no idea exist.
And a lot of people don't talk about values, or even if they do, sometimes they give it lip service. But I've known you long enough now where that isn't lip service. It is something that you lead with often. I've gone to some of your all hands. I've been around your team, and people talk about your values. Maybe share with this audience the values that you guys have as a company.
So we're right in the middle of a revalue.
There you go.
So our original values are respect each other, learn and grow, work is not life, And these have taken us so far, but now we're actually doing a big project to survey the company and refresh them.
And you're taking input from the entire company base and all the employees to try to find what makes sense, not just for now, but moving forward. And thinking about moving forward, maybe shed some light on what the future looks like for where you guys are. I think it'd be really interesting to know that.
Yeah, I mean, so we're 500 employees worldwide. We have people not just in Oakland, our headquarters, but all over the US, in the UK, and Australia. We have thousands of customers all over the world. Our mission is that we help our customers deliver, control, and measure their software. And I believe that that is a universal need, and we'll have tens of thousands of customers.
That quick, just tens of thousands. And you've continued to execute. One of the things that I think is interesting that I've heard you talk about is when you were first starting out, being able to build somewhat of an operating system so that in terms of an org chart and being able to build trust around different sectors of the business. Talk a little bit about that insight of what you learned as a product manager that's helped you be a leader when you were first setting up the business.
Yeah, it goes back to our very early days. Up until we were about, we called it the lunch table. When we were 10 people, we could all fit around the lunch table.
Yeah.
And then we did a daily stand-up for all of us. Stand-up's an engineering technique, but we would have the entire 10-person company stand up and say every day, like, what are you working on? And it was great because the salespeople got to know the engineers knew marketing. Once we got beyond 12 people, that does not scale at all. You can't have a 20-person stand-up every day. And that's when we started getting a lot more intentional about having an all-hands. And our all-hands at the beginning were very simple. Like, it was me and 20 people, and like people just shouted questions at me. And we had this really noisy fridge that I would shout over.
Did you give the fridge a name at all? No.
It was terrible.
It was terrible. I'm sure it had a name.
Now we just have a lot more structure. You know, with 500 people, we have all hands, but nobody shouts at me over a fridge.
That's a good thing. When you think about the landscape and the industry you're in, I talked about you being an elite athlete because you're competing every day. You're competing for time. You're competing for money. You're actually competing in a very competitive industry. There is competition out there. How do you, as a founder, avoid picking your head up and looking at what's happening around you and what other individuals are doing or what other companies are doing?
Yeah, so I think because we were creating a category, it was easier and harder for us in some ways in that we were defining our own vision. We could shape, this is the way we want the market to go and build functionality. We do, of course, have competitors now. What I tell the team is actually a metaphor from, I was an elite athlete in high school and crew, so I was a nationally ranked rower. And when you're in the boat, you know that there's boats on either side of you that you're racing against, and you're just rowing as hard as you can. And if you're looking over your shoulder at the other boats, the whole rhythm of the boat is going to go off, because you're torquing your neck while you're trying to row. So what I tell the team is, like, we got to row fast. And yeah, you can take a peek now and then at what your competitors are doing, but we got to keep focused on where we're going. And the other metaphor I love from rowing is because it is so demoralizing for our competitors if they look over and there's open water and they can't even see us.
Yeah. Being way out front, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But being able to stay focused and disciplined and not get distracted by what others are doing around you, you hear that time and time again. Easier said than done because investors in the world will constantly, tell you what other people are doing.
Well, when I was at TripIt, so TripIt was the #1 travel app.
Yeah.
And we would build features very quickly, and our competitors would often copy them. But what they didn't realize is sometimes that feature didn't work at all, and we were actually iterating on a better version of it. So like they'd copy something in our sign-up flow, and I'm like, well, if you asked me, I would have said that was a bad sign-up flow, and we were about to come up with something much better.
Well, being able to be nimble and quick and speed is the name of the game in a lot of ways. One of the things we talk an awful lot about at NextPlay is this word excellence. and it's something that's important, and it's defined differently by everybody. I'm curious, how do you define excellence?
You know, I think for a startup, it's so hard because when it's the earliest is when you have the least resources. Like, so now we have a beautiful website, with dozens of case studies.
It is a great website. If you haven't seen the website, it's amazing. It's beautiful.
In the early days, it was my co-founder and I was writing the copy. And so excellence then was enough that was good. I think people who are doing startups sometimes think they have to imitate a much larger company and try to do everything all at once, instead of having like a crisp 5-page website that conveys what you do.
Yep.
And is excellent.
When you think about being a founder, one of the things you've also learned that being a founder can oftentimes be lonely, and there are moments in the journey as you're building a company where it's hard to go to your board, it's hard to go to advisors, it's hard to go to your company and coworkers, it's hard to even maybe go to your spouse or significant others. Where do you turn in those kind of areas where you need some advice, you need some support, and who do you lean on that gives you some guidance when you're trying to wrestle through some challenging decisions?
Yeah. So in our early days, we were in an accelerator called Alchemist Accelerator. And I loved being in it because we were in a cohort of other startups. So there were 14 of us in our batch. And we all sat together at Yammer, which is a subsidiary of Microsoft. And this is back in 2015, so they had free lunch and free dinner. And I, at the time, was not making a salary at all. So I ate free lunch and free dinner there every single day.
Every single day, getting it in.
I called it the Yammer meal plan. And it was great because there were all these other startups that I could get dinner with, because they're all kind of in the same boat of like, hey, we don't have any money. If you ever want to get free food, Microsoft is a good place to get it.
That's a good spot.
Yeah,
Tip.
but it was really fun because we were all going through the same things at the same time. So I could see where they were scaling, where people were getting their first customers. Same, then I went to an incubator called HeavyBit in downtown SF, and there were companies later scale than us, like PagerDuty and Circle CI, and there were companies much earlier than us, so I could calibrate where we were in our journey. So that's my big advice. Find other startup founders. And the nice thing is sometimes if they're earlier than you, you also realize how far you've come.
Another man's floor is another man's ceiling sometimes. I think about, obviously, the word startup grind, and the word grind, the title of this conference. And I think about what you just shared, the grind at the very beginning, and the fact that you weren't taking a salary, the fact that you were looking for free lunches and dinners and everything in between. I think sometimes you talk to founders, and there are times where it may appear that they have it too good, or they don't understand maybe the grind of what it really takes to build something from the beginning when you have nothing. What are some of the characteristics that you look for when you're maybe angel investing or around other founders that you want to share your time with?
Just like, it's called grit sometimes. I think if you are doing a startup because you think you're going to get to go on stage at conferences and talk a lot, that takes 8 years.
At least.
Yeah. If you're doing a startup because you love your product, you love customers, you love building, that's what I look for. The people who say, well, I just want to be in TechCrunch and go to the fun parties, it's like, well, there's all the hard work before that.
Well, we talk a lot about this as well. When you think about the physical gifts that you have as an athlete, that's one thing, and you can go and you can train and you can continue to enhance yourself as an athlete. But one of the things that's extremely hard to train and continue to improve on is your mental toughness. And as a CEO, what you just talked about, grit, people have a hard time even defining it, but mental toughness. What are some of the things that maybe you do to help you with mental toughness? And I know you are a glutton for punishment. You find ways to push yourself, and that makes it easier. But what are some of the things you do?
I think there's the basics of, get enough sleep. There was this cult about 10 years ago of like successful people don't sleep. It's a lie.
That's a lie. What's enough sleep for you?
7 or 8 hours a
Okay.
night. I mean,
That's not bad. I
but
need to sleep more then.
like the people I saw burning out were the ones who were trying to get by on 3 to 4 hours a night,
Yeah.
and they're stressed, they're unhappy, they just burn out. Another thing that helps me a lot is I've done a lot of distance races, and sometimes you hit a wall, like around mile 18, and 100 miles, it's usually around mile 85.
100 miles.
Actually, you hit like multiple.
Yeah.
And
Mile 1, that would be my wall. But you did 100. Keep going.
and I didn't finish every race I started. Like I dropped out of a race at mile 70 once. And that race tormented me for a solid year because I thought I could have finished it. So the next year I went back and I finished that race. So when I hit a bad patch with the startup, sometimes I'm like, okay, this is just a bad patch. Eat a meal, get some sleep. You'll get through this.
Dig in. I mean, it's such an interesting perspective, being able to reflect on moments in the past where maybe you did quit or maybe you did fail, but using that as fuel to push you to go further is something that's also extremely important. And being able to tap into that is something that I think you've done and others have done very well. And that mental toughness is so important. When you think about some of the things that you're trying to accomplish, you talked about 500 employees, the number of customers that you have now. What are some of the big milestones that you personally are working on that whether it's a new product feature or a potential customer that you're chasing? What are some of the big milestones that Ida said at the end of this year, if we do this, it'll be a successful year?
So every year we set our goals. And it's funny, every year I stand in front of the whole company and I present the goals, and everybody like audibly gasps, because I'm like, we're gonna double or triple our revenue, and everybody's like, oh, Edith. And then at the end of the year, I stand in front of them and I say, look, team, that number that we said we weren't gonna do? There it is. We made it. And by the way, here's the goals for next year. And that you think we're not gonna make, but we're gonna break it down quarter by quarter, month by month, customer by customer. And we're going to get there.
I mean, being able to incrementally break it down is also something that I think you've done very well, and others too. And maybe touch on that in the sense of this idea of competing, but not competing so far and about it's not just winning the year. It's actually coming all the way back to just win the day. How do you preach that and encourage your team to focus on just winning the day?
Just breaking stuff down into smaller goals. How many people do we need to hire this month? How many sales leads do we have to get? A big part of our marketing is going to events, to conferences. So how many conferences do we have to go to? And just making it very quantifiable so the team buys into that like each small chunk of effort is going to add up to a big mountain.
Well, I know that there's a number of startups here, and hopefully that they'll start finding ways to work with you. And more importantly, I'm thankful that I can call you a friend and somebody that I admire and respect. And your continued pursuit of excellence is something that continues to inspire me and many others. So thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for being here today. And we appreciate it, Edith. Thank you.
Thank you for being an investor.